Hello and welcome back to my conversation with Dr. Melanie Dunlap, who shared her story of cancer and some of the choices she made in her diagnosis. And then she shared how her life changed again when her husband was diagnosed with cancer. Kind of a double whammy. I'm so happy and honored that you're sharing it with us, Dr. Melanie.
Thank you.
I'm María Tomás-Keegan, your host of From Upside Down to Right Side Up, Tips for the Transition. And I'm delighted to be sharing inspiring stories like Dr. Melanie's. They're stories of rebounding and rising up because they help us to know that we're not alone as life turns us upside down and we struggle with that. And we learn that there is hope. Thanks again, Dr. Melanie, for sharing your story. As we ended the last segment, you left us with a bit of a cliffhanger. We promised to talk, though, about the emotional journey of hearing the cancer diagnosis and then going through your whole recovery process, which was lots of very tough choices to make, and then becoming a caregiver when your husband was diagnosed. It's kind of a journey between the fear and the hope. And I'd love to hear how you handled both of those.
Well, thank you, Maria. The fear was obviously the first one that showed up. What I learned from this experience was that there is actually a fear energy that is within the actual cancer medicine. I would go and have early morning appointments, and I would get in, and the space wouldn't be full, but you still could kind of feel the fear. The energy was always there. And that was something that, while I understood that there's fear associated with any kind of major health challenge, I never really realized how it just sat there and waited for us to come in. I would go into my doctor's appointments with this really resolve of knowing who I was and what I needed and what my body needed, but when I would just get in that energy, it would take over. And so I had to learn to prepare myself. Fortunately, I have those skills, and I would practice my breath work and all of those sorts of things, but I had to be vigilant for it. And I had to learn to separate that. And that really, dealing with the fear, we tend to think that hope is what deals with the fear and helps with the fear. But for me, they kind of had to go separately. Because I would have to look for the hope and be hopeful, and I had to bring that forward. Yes, there were a lot of people, and I was supported so well, but there's times, it's dark, you're laying in bed, you have a scan tomorrow. Pulling that out is where you get your strength from. But the wonderful thing is, hope is an emotion, but hope is also an emotion that's tied to the body, just like fear is. We've all gotten to that place of fear, and you feel yourself tense up, and you recognize that as fear. That's a body response. So therefore, if we work with the body, we can actually create the hope as well. We can do some practices. We can do some breath work, some relaxation techniques. We can use our body to help us bring hope into our mind.
There's a concept here that I've never heard before. that the fear kind of comes from the outside, right? You walk into the doctor's office and you are surrounded by this fear energy, and it affects you. And then the hope comes from the inside. It's not that the fear doesn't also come from the inside. I understand that, but it's just a concept that I was just imagining, the kind of that fear energy coming at us, and the hope having to come forward from within. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. It truly does.
It's an interesting way of thinking about it. So tell us a little bit about, you talked about this in the last episode. What was the biggest difference for you between having cancer and then being a caregiver for your husband with cancer? You said that was harder.
That was harder. And it's going to sound a little strange, but when you are the person with the diagnosis, you know what's going on. You know what's going on with your body. You know how you feel, hopefully what is right for you, what you've been through. If I could use the word control, you are kind of in control of that. You know. But when it's someone else, when it's a loved one, you don't know except what they're telling you. And it becomes this, for me it was a little awkward, not so much because we've been married a long time, but it's always having to ask, how are you doing? What's going on? And fortunately we have been married a long time, and I've been into natural health for a long time, so he knows, because you also kind of have to ask those questions correctly if you want to know really what's going on. Not just how are you, because if you've been involved with someone with a health challenge, which I know you, Maria, have, that people always are coming to you and how are you doing, how are you feeling, all that kind of stuff. And after a while, you just get so tired of answering those questions that you just say, I'm okay, or I'm fine, or something like that. And those are not really good answers that you're looking for as a caregiver. So, I would ask him and I would get the right information, but when you're watching someone you care deeply about in pain, and for him, he had to do chemo and radiation, and very aggressively. There's a whole thing happens to you as a caregiver when you are driving someone somewhere that is going to make them unhappy, uncomfortable, and possibly even in pain. But that it is the best thing. It's what needs to happen. It's still really hard. And just being on the outside, you want to help that person. You want to do anything that you can. And he's my hero. He's my Superman. This was not supposed to happen to him. For me, it was, I could say, oh, well, this is a wonderful life lesson, and I'm learning stuff that's, right up my alley and all this kind of stuff. But then when it was him, he was so aggressive. I'm like, oh my gosh. And while I didn't really face my own mortality, I never felt like I was going to die. That was actually on the table for him. And so going through those, going through all of that for anyone is really difficult. But having to have it under that whole cancer umbrella, and people who are going through chemo and radiation, they're very sick, and things literally change moment to moment. I mean, he would ask for something he finally felt like he could eat, and by the time I could get it prepared and get it in front of him, he couldn't eat it. So, and it's harder. It was harder for me to bring myself out of the fear, because again, I didn't know what was going on inside of him. I'm only looking at the outside, and he looked really rough on the outside.
I'll bet he did. I do understand what you're talking about. I've been caregiver for my husband for a few years now, and you said something that resonated so highly with me. that you ask, how are you doing? And you really want to know, what can you do for them? Is there something you can do? And they don't necessarily know how to articulate that. In the case of my husband, he was not as in tune with his own body. He was an athlete all his life, but not terribly in tune with his body, and unable to really say, so this pain that I'm feeling is, it's sharp, and it's a tingle, or it's pulsing, or whatever. He couldn't really describe it. It was very difficult to be the caregiver and watch. So I appreciate your sharing that part of it, because especially from your perspective, you're a doctor. And you know about this stuff, and most of us don't have that knowledge. You're coming from a different place, and yet you still struggle like the rest of us in how we deal with the fear, and how we find the hope, and how we wrestle with being a caregiver. So thank you so much for sharing all of that.
My pleasure.
So I can't wait to hear the next section. The next segment is going to be more hopeful, because we are going to hear the lessons that Dr. Melanie learned that are going to help us, so that we can learn how to make choices for ourselves, and what's important for us to know through her lessons. So I can't wait for that part of the conversation. I want you all to stay tuned as we wrap up with Dr. Melanie Dunlap. I'm María Tomás-Keegan. Till next time.